All right, welcome everybody to this installation of the Sunday Afternoon With at the Kelly House Museum. We've been doing this for many decades. Today we are going to be enjoying the sea tales of Norman Vall. Many of you know him. For those of you who don't, he's been a coast resident since the 60s and has a very interesting career. He'll be talking about some of that. He is the better one, I think, to make the best introduction. But I just wanted to welcome you and thank you. His exhibit, Wind and Water. You'll see these around. These are the exhibit catalogs. They are numbered, and every object here corresponds to one of these numbers. So if you want to know more about what you're looking at after the presentation, pick up one of these and you can go through it and learn a little bit more about this very interesting collection.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
So I want to start with thank you all for coming. Really, I didn't expect this. And I want to spend just a minute to explain what the collection is and how it got started. And that from my earliest time, you can be involved with boats or with sailing, or you're in the maritime with ships, and you're a mariner or a seaman. And there is definitely a difference between those that belly up to the bar at the yacht club and those that go to sea for a living. But a lot of us are introduced to to being on the water. First by the smallest boats imaginable to larger boats, but very few go from sailing into shipping, into the maritime. I had the unique opportunity, as a teenager in junior high school, to have access to a friend's father's boat in Wilmington. And as Friday after school, Bancroft Junior High School, ride the bus all the way across LA, and walk from the Ford plant down to the boat in Wilmington. And up on the Hard, there was a steam schooner, a steam lumber schooner like the Wapama that was in the boneyard, but not yet cut up. And I was fascinated by what had been built decades before. So that began an interest in the maritime, and eventually, when I got, after a year at LACC, got to the California Maritime Academy. With my eyesight, that washed out a year later, but that introduced me into deep water sailing, and then from there I met George Kiskadden of Marine Chartering Company and the owner of Spirit, and that opened up a whole lot of sailing in the commercial waterfront to me, and he got me a job that lasted for about 4 years or so as a stevedore superintendent, managing gangs of longshoremen, mostly on the Oakland estuary. So to go from small boats to larger boats, some sailing, and then into the shipping industry was I don't have any friends that followed that path. And after 4 years at the stevedore company, I was thinking, this is a fascinating industry. Containers were just beginning. Hand-hold, hand-carry, hand-lifted cargo, bag by bag, box by box, was really on the way out. Steam winches were gone. 21 longshoremen in a gang was bankrupting the companies. That couldn't last. And so right on the cusp, where can you get an education? And I learned that the London School of Economics had the only university I've found anywhere that taught stevedoring. It's not a local, interesting thing for 99.9% of the public. So I said, I'm going to go and take a look. So I let Kiskadden know that I was on my way to England. He said, well, I'd like you to stop in Iceland and look at a boat, I'm thinking, a small ship. And then from there, he sent me to Oslo in Norway, and from there to Copenhagen, continuing to go and visit these ships that he was thinking of buying for his company in San Francisco. And I was just fascinated by crawling around in the backwaters of these harbors in North Europe, and started to look around, and some of these ships were surprisingly cheap. And so I began to say, my gosh, why study shipping if you can buy one? And so I began looking, and later with a friend that was working for my uncle in Berlin, we got this Zundap. It's like a BMW, but it isn't. Zundap sidecar for 80 marks, then the equivalent of $20. So we stuffed the sidecar with me and a whole bunch of West German magazines, and off we went into East Germany and then across on the ferry to Sweden to start looking for what might be a possible ship. Well, down in the nose of the sidecar, I'd stuffed all of these West German magazines, and every time we passed a rural bus bench, folded up another one and stuck it down between the pieces of wood and the seat. So fortunately, we were not questioned about what else was in the sidecar. Anyway, we went looking for ship after ship, and what we were finding is that they were cut down. Masts were gone. They hadn't been to sea for years, or they were too big, too expensive, not for sale. And we heard of a ship that nobody knew where it was, the Free. And
You said free?
F-R-I.
Oh, Free. Okay.
Yeah. And pronounced Free. And continued looking at a lot of beautiful woodwork. And I really got pulled into the whole idea that this was really something I wanted to do. And having studied international shipping at San Francisco State and with a minor in ocean transportation, this was really became my life objective. So eventually we ended up in Aalborg, which is way up in the north end of Jutland, a long way from rain, not fun traveling on the motorcycle. And so we get to Aalborg and find this ship, 110 feet long, Danish measurement. It's an eighth of an inch longer per inch. And they even have the new European inch. So they do some things in metric, they do some things in inch. Why do they have a different inch system? Is that the English, not only had one war with us in 1812, they also decided to go and burn the ships on the yards in Denmark. And the Danes said they're done with the imperial measurement system, created their own inch, and decided that they and the Norwegians would create their own economic opportunities with their own measurement system. It's the same kind of thing the British did after the war with Whitworth thread. It's just crazy where you can create an economic opportunity. It's a myth by changing your measurement system. So in the 30s or 40s, they had added this wheelhouse, and it was obvious that a lot of work had to be done here. And did I really know what I was getting into? Well, I'd lived on board the Balclutha. I'd worked for the state parks in the rebuild of the Thayer, the Wapama, the Alma, and I had some idea, but none of them had gone to sea. I primarily, as a park aide, I'm just working for the state in the shipyard for 3 years. But having finished at San Francisco State in trade and having done some sailing, living on the Balclutha, and here was an economic opportunity, $7,500. And wow, so I talked to the broker and read the Baltic Maritime Conference Bill of Sale criteria that allows a potential buyer to buy a 1 option for 30 days. It's built into everybody in the ship brokerage business is following this one contract. 1% came out to about $80. So I said, okay, fine. I'll get an option for 29 days, 30 days, and I'll go out and find the balance of the money. 29 days later, I located the money and bought the ship. And then realized how far away I was from San Francisco. And, but the search was over. The ship had been found. It had been purchased. Hi. Thanks for coming. My gosh. Good.
We were here.
We
We
probably
took
haven't
a-
missed anything, right?
I was just talking about Kiskadden, Marine Chartering, Spirit. Yes, but you know all that. So, good. So, the next thing that happened was to start to tear it apart. And so off came the wheelhouse and there's just endless repair and update to complete the restoration project. But who was going to do all this work? So I put an ad in the Herald Paris Tribune under personals and said, or under help wanted, whatever word they used, and said all work, no job. And we had no idea how long this was going to last, but I had over 100 applicants. So John Sylvester, now the president of Marine Chartering Company, was coming from the university in Stockholm. Application came from London, from Neil Brady, who was an architect and a shipwright. We had a doctor on board from West Berlin, a scion to the son of a member of the board of directors of Volkswagen Werk, and only learned later that he was being tailed all the time, that his family was so afraid that he might be kidnapped that they had a ghost right alongside. Didn't find that out until the end of the cruise. Hardly a cruise. And what's happening here is this is the International Paint donated all of the paints to us, and this was what they called Silver Prime Con. When we got into 80-degree water in the Caribbean and started to come apart, Thor Heyerdahl was coming with Ra 2, was on one side of Puerto Rico. We were in the same blow going into the Caribbean. And the water was coming into the ship so fast in the stern that the phosphorescence from the water was so bright you could read by it. It was inside the boat, in the darkest part of it. We were making a massive amount of water. And, but of course the radio didn't work. And how we got through all of the documentation and the government approvals was that we could not keep her in the Danish flag. The name of the ship stayed with the previous owner, unlike the American system where a ship does not change its name. In Scandinavia, the name goes with the owner, and before we had this boat back in the water, he had already bought another free and used the same name again. So I've got myself ahead of myself. We get this crew together, and the kids came down after school every day. They said to learn English, and it didn't help me learn Danish very much. And without their help, it would have taken a lot longer. Very helpful. The community was fantastic. They really turned to. And at the end of the restoration, I went to the harbor master and said, well, we've been here for months. How much do I owe you? And he asked me, well, did you pay your bills? Did anybody get arrested? Did you steal anything? did you cause any problems? And I said, no, no, no. And he said, well, I don't know why I would charge you. You know, it was, okay, fine. So the haul out, using the community waste, eventually people were coming down with sadness and saying they were had real regret that another American could come and not, they would have felt better if I chopped it up into some kind of a tourist boat for cruising around in the Baltic, because that would have ruined her. What had happened was that we'd restored her to as close as you could get her to what she was when she was built in 1912. And what Neil is hanging on to here is a two-blade propeller about 5 feet in diameter that is controllable pitch like an airplane. And so it doesn't have a transmission or gearbox. It doesn't have a reverse gear. You just reverse the pitch of the propeller and you've got a stern as well as a head. The restoration went on and the crew was there, the ship was purchased, and the next thing, where's the cargo? The whole idea is we're bringing the last sailing cargo to San Francisco. And so off I went to Copenhagen and talked to a number of the companies that eventually did become shippers, and trying to find out what were they, everywhere I went I was turned down. And I had been talking to the marketing people, the transportation people, and they were not interested in shipping on this ship at all, and regardless of the cost. So I tried to raise the price, I tried to lower the price, and I could not sell this to anybody. And I went back and sat on the ship and wondered why, what's the answer? How to resolve this? And I came up with my thinking of why do people do anything? And I came up with two major motivations of people are fear and greed. So I went back to the same people and I said, if you ship with me, I won't take any competitors. Well, Tuborg said they didn't want Carlsberg or Eric the Red on board. So they said, we'll put in 20 tons. And I then charged them 5 times the going freight rate. So it ended up with Teacher's Scotch, 17.5 tons of Drambuie, Guinness Stout, Cherry Chiaffa wine, Asp Homeblood candles. I wrote a letter to Rolex, and I said, we need to know what time it is. Can we have a watch? They wrote back and said, go to Copenhagen and pick one out. And so here it is. And so I take this letter into the store in Copenhagen, and I say, they could not believe it. And they said, but they didn't check the verification of it. And I decided, Norman, don't be greedy. Take the lowest cost Rolex they have and be happy with that. So Chevron put in all of the fuel. International Paint put in all of the paints and coatings, except that silver prime con that I mentioned earlier. When we got into the 80-degree water, we almost lost the ship because she just had opened up. And so we're going to jump around here a little bit. I'm going to stay with this near sinking in the Caribbean. And we tried to first stop the leak from the inside. That doesn't work. You got to get on the outside, and eventually there's a slide in here. These are not in order, unfortunately. That we keel hauled the shipwright, and actually pulled him down so he could get down underneath the counter stern of the ship, so he could put a canvas mat onto those seams that were obviously the worst leakers. By the time we get to Aruba in the Caribbean, we know that we're in major trouble, and we've got to get every one of these seams that is now leaking coated with horsehair and then with lead sheet. Uh, so that eventually ended up with over a month of diving time. And it was far more than we could do. We got through the Panama Canal, anchored up at a small island on the in the Pacific side, and a couple of the crew members, Neil and Bob Armstrong, he was a Kiwi, the other an Aussie. They really had a lot of drinking to do. And so at a bar they were talking about the problem we were having. And a couple of guys from Noriaga's government said, oh, we can help you with that. Yeah. And a couple of U.S. Air Force guys were down at the other end of the bar and asked if we were U.S. flag or what were we. And they said, well, we're U.S. flag. And they said, we'll take care of it. And so these two guys come back to the ship, and they tell me the story that the Air Force is going to come to our aid. And, oh, sure. What have you been drinking? So, not the next morning, but the morning after, you hear this whomp, 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 whomp. And there's a series of helicopters that are coming out to the island where we are. And then they drop down, and these guys are jumping out of the, they're in scuba gear, coming out of airplanes right by the ship and going to work. And I had enough horsehair felt and 25 pounds of copper tacks and strips of this lead, and lead seamed every one of these leaking seams. It took a month. And it was just fascinating. And finally I said, we got to go, regardless of what happens next. We don't want to be on this coast in September with the blows that can occur and what you see now in the weather today. This occurred, we were leaving in late August from Panama to come north. So everything, we're fine, we're fueled up, we're ready to go. We get to up to Acapulco, and I've got paper problems. And the port captain says, we cannot accept your papers. They have to be done by an agent. And I said, I've come halfway around the world. I'm able to deal with the paperwork. Why can't you accept this declaration? Finally, I found out that it was because it was always on the wrong size of paper. Welcome to the Mexican bureaucracy. So,
It's no better now.
but so I saw that the port captain had gone up to visit him in a tall building overlooking the port, and that he went home at 5 o'clock. There's the answer. So I figured that if he leaves so punctually at 5 o'clock, he's in the elevator. And before he gets to the street, we could be gone. And by the time he gets to his car, before no cell phones, I've got an hour. So I tell the crew, get ready to go, slip a line through the mooring buoy. We're going to be charging the batteries tomorrow, but we're leaving. And at 5 o'clock, his shades come down in his tall building, and we slip the line, put it in reverse, get away from the mooring, down we go, and get out of Acapulco, only to be followed. And I don't know if they were Treasury agents or immigration or whatever. I still had all the passports, and they had no paperwork, and we were on our way north. And the sea was rough. This was the sea in late August, early September, that had tried to avoid,
10 to
couldn't
20
make it.
degrees is fierce
Yeah.
in this time of year.
So, and it was, but the strangest thing happened. The sun went into an eclipse. The sky went dark. The Mexican Navy turned around and went back. So I'm sure with the thinking that we'll catch up with them at Turtle Bay when they go in for fuel, and we found the most economic way to run the ship, and got into San Diego. And only after we'd gone through immigration, quarantine, and the Treasury people had to put a $500,000 bond on the cargo. Remember all that Drambuie?
Yeah.
Well, they wanted they sealed the hatches and whatever. Only then did I learn, once we cleared customs, etc., that my crew, totally unbeknownst to me, had filled the forecastle full that they could hide enough Panama Red to get them through the trip. And I was just totally shocked by all this. You know, I lived back aft in the master's cabin, you know, and what we had for a galley was very minimal, and that was right up in the forepeak with the forecastle that got built in. When I bought the ship, it didn't have a forecastle. It had one single bunk up in the forepeak, and we were going to have a total crew of 7, so I needed 6 bunks. So the cost of wood in Denmark, expensive, and so I went out looking for used wood. Well, they were tearing down a number of apartment houses, and so I got a couple of the crew members, and we went and we tore up the floors in these old apartment houses. You know, beautiful shellacked, polished, clean wood. Far better than anything brand new out of the yard. So, and we brought down load after load, and without fancy carpentry, but with all of the varnish sides showing out, it looked great. And so we put in diesel heat and a skylight, so it was somewhat habitable. But we didn't have any running water. We didn't have refrigeration. We didn't have a head, used a bucket inside of a little hutch. The radio didn't work. I doubt that the life raft would have worked either. And how we could register it as a yacht and then book to carry cargo. And most of us had driver's licenses, but nothing more than that. And it was the European spirit was just fantastic to make this happen. And when the Danes saw that there was all kinds of questions starting to come out and trying to deal with the paperwork, they simply said, well, would you please request that the American embassy request that we do this or that? And so they're not taking it on themselves. They're being requested to do it. So I'm getting involved in this international diplomacy. And so I get it worked out with the Americans in Copenhagen and the Danes in the yard, and their ships still, I can't pronounce it now. But they still have to get through the paperwork with the British Board of Trade. And the big question was about the radio, and one of the things that the Danes did note was that the radio had to be repaired. And I'm saying, oh my gosh, what's going to happen here? So this guy comes down by the name of Nielsen, and to do the inspection for the British Board of Trade. And if he says no, the next step that they would do is take the thing apart, and they all the way down to getting the ship out of the water and whatever, and which could be the total disaster for me. And this Nielsen is going through this, and he comes down to this one thing about the radio, and I just saw it in Danish, and he says, oh, this is not a problem. My parents are Danish. I can read this. And he made a negative into a positive. He flipped it. And he says, "Oh, it's good to hear the radio's repaired." Well, I thought that was great, but when we needed it, it wasn't there. And so it was just one experience after another. And the guys were just fantastic. Very different backgrounds, but they had a total commitment. They joined the ship in March, February, March, April, and a few of them even before that. And we sailed in April, and we arrived on September 24th. So they spent close to 5 months on board that ship with no warm, without a shower. So, but we made up for it when man stepped on the moon in July of that year. We were taking turns dipping off the main boom in into the Caribbean with phosphorescence just dripping from us, listening on the single sideband radio that man was on the moon, and we were at sea. So it was a real good trade-off. So I could go through a lot of these. This is not the Free, but it's a very similar ship. And I went to the museum in Elsinore, where Hamlet lost his head, and took photographs of how, and learned from this rigging how to do our rigging. She was ice sheathed, and in that, the winter of 68, 69, the Limfjord, where we were tied up by Aalborg, had enough fresh water that the ice was, they said, up to 2 feet thick. You could drive on it, and the ships were not crushed. I didn't see her lift either. She had a donkey engine up forward, a cargo boom so she could load herself. And we lived in the shipyard and ate outdoors, showered in the where the shipyard workers would, and stayed on the ship. I do not. I don't think I paid. I don't think anybody ever spent a night in a motel room. That was I can't believe that. That must. I'm sure that stove was not left there like that in the lower photo. That's the castle at Elsinore. There were in the bottom shot. That's where on our way to Tuborg Haven. And Tuborg really got into it. They went. They brought the 20 tons of beer down in horse-drawn wagons.
Yeah.
And
20 tons.
and the public came by. Oops, back up for a minute. The public came by to watch our progress. And one of the things that I started was that the idea of one of the things that you did on Saturday, everybody polished their brass. So everybody got sparkling and it looked great. Sunday, everybody took off. It was pretty quiet. But one of the things I added, not having very much brass to do, was to take trachar, a black pitch tar, and paint the anchor. That started a fad. And before long, everywhere in Aalborg were these shiny black anchors, very seldom used. People came down, and as I said before, with some regret that she was going to leave. This is how a stevedore stowage plan is drawn. It shows the third dimension in the drawing. So the plume rosa, 15 tons of plume rosa, halfway across the bottom, 20 tons of Tuborg, 17 and a half tons of drum buoy, a ton of Guinness stout. Teachers, it's on the drawing, but they would not allow us to carry it. And the Cherry Chiaffa wine worked. The fun thing about the ton of Guinness was that when we got to San Francisco, they said that it just wasn't worth dealing with. Did I have a truck? And I said, oh yes, I do. And they said, we'll write you a release. Just please get it out of the bond. Have a good time. So I had a ton of Guinness stout for a while for a while. So this is where we tied up in Scotland. You lock into the port at Leith, and you've heard the test for DUI, and is how you say it. Will the Leith police please dismisseth me? And if you can do it, you know, you're okay to drive home. Did you get it?
No. The Leith police?
Will the Leith police please dismisseth me? Okay, all together.
So it's all the time. Dismisses the
Excellent, you got it. That's good.
drive, all right.
So,
You need enough teeth to do that too.
yeah. Totally out of date piers, docks, crane, aprons, warehouses. It's all left over from a previous century. Still in Scotland. We broke the mizzen boom and had to put into Brest in France, and turned into another interesting experience is that there isn't any wood for sale. France does not have a lot of wood. And so we began to go further out of the urban center into more into the smaller ports to take a look around. And I found the mast of a good-sized sailboat that would serve as a boom for what I needed. So I simply asked this small boat owner that lived in farming country, how much do you want for it? But he considered that the rudest thing that could be said, and he said, that's so Anglo, you know, it was just terrible. And he says, I'm not going to talk to you about that until I know you, and if I like you, then we'll talk about that. So this took up some more time, 3 or 4 more days to have lunch. And you know, how are we doing? Oh, okay, finally we get the boom, and replace the mizzen boom, and we keep the butt ends of the broken boom. Tuck it away with the, this is the cargo boom, and as you can see, the mizzen boom, which would be up here, is not there. So it's, we get it repaired. I'm glad we kept it on board because it wasn't long after that we broke the yager boom. The yager boom is what's on top of the bowsprit, and it extends another 8 feet.
Wow.
One of our few shots from the Avon dinghy. We had 7 Avon dinghies. 6 we would be we would carry to San Francisco for them, and the 7th one we could keep. So here is Neil. He's butting together the broken boom with the from the mizzen and putting it together with the what's left of the yager boom on top of the bowsprit, and all done by hand. and there'll be other shots of this that shows how he takes all of that rigging off the end of the bowsprit. Everything is pulled back and sails repaired. There it is. Boom, bang.
Why did the spar fail?
My fault.
How come?
I tried to open a link on the chain, and when I expanded that link, I don't know what happened inside of it, but that's the link that broke. And so we had to take the Yager boom off so that we could get it on. And there he is. He's making I would call it a rabbit or a scarf, where he's cutting this down using an axe, and to put the two pieces of wood together, which worked. A lot of cleanup. Grand Canary, not a very welcoming, friendly place, in my experience. The guy at Chevron had no interest in our venture at all. He says, "I don't care what they told you in Denmark. We're not giving away any free fuel." And we got chased off of one anchorage, got chased off a mooring buoy, and really wondered. So finally, we just lofted it alongside of someone else. Eventually, we get to the Panama Canal. For us, this was rough water. And
What sail are you carrying there?
there, I think it might just be the main.
Is this in the canal?
No, this is in the Caribbean before she began leaking profusely. And so we were doing some underwater work, and everybody had done a little bit of diving, which meant very little. And this guy heard about our situation, and he said, "Come with me. I'll teach you how to use a bottle, so you can get down there and stay there for a while." Do you remember Jack LaLanne?
Yeah.
Yeah, Jack LaLanne was in Aruba. He comes down to the ship and says, "Come on up to my place. I'll show you how to do this." So how could this happen? Talk about fate. And obviously, a roll of film was run through the camera twice.
Yeah.
There's no way that I could I have no such skill. And
That's a great picture.
it really is.
Very unique.
Early day
Yeah.
photoshopping.
Yeah, right. Right. Rotate. There's the doctor. He was an emergency room doctor in Berlin, West Berlin, and he was just saddened, pissed off, in some ways heartbroken that he had studied so hard to learn so much to help people who got into the emergency room weekend after weekend after weekend after weekend. He was just tired of it. So he brought all of his books on psychiatry with him. He was going to turn himself into a psychiatrist.
Yay.
Bob Armstrong, I've found him, he was smashing cars in a Scottish car lot with a sledgehammer. And I said, "Well, you're strong enough, but what experience have you had?" And he says, "Oh, I worked on a sheep ship in the Falklands." Oh, okay, well, fine. Well, to get there, to get back from, the Falklands are as far south as London is north. It's a long way from anywhere. And I said, "And you have experience what on a sheep ship?" What? And he says, I don't know, he didn't explain how, but all these fingers from here were gone. So he had all these stuff, and it was fascinating to watch him work. And this was a real concern to me, because he had his own way of tying knots, and I said, and doing hitches, and I said, we can't have that. It's got to be, you don't get to create your own system for the middle of the night. And so we went through a training program so that he would tie things down the same way everybody else on the ship did. There he is working on that,
Oh, yeah.
putting those two pieces together. Here's where we keel hauled them to pull them down. So we put one line to his feet and one line to his shoulders, and over he went. In the Panama Canal, alongside of submarines, rain. And these used to be in order until I had the hard drive changed. This is one of the Air Force guys. And we were tied up to this island, which was an R&R refuge. The Air Force guys loved it. And the women were constantly swimming out to the ship to meet more guys. It was... There's another one of those. It shows the stern lantern from both directions. Panama Canal.
Yeah.
That rectangular object just forward of the shrouds was our water tank. Steel tank. We coated it with cement. Questions? Good. Well, good. Here's a suggestion for questions. Any questions?
What's the aircraft doing there?
I'm sorry?
In the earlier picture, there was a plane.
Oh,
That one.
well, that's Dutch Sea Rescue coming out to drop us pumps because we were sinking.
Oh.
So, and so.
Details.
Yeah, and that's why we drifted the Avon hundreds of feet behind the ship so that they would drop the pump and the parachute line. There'd be hopefully it would cross, and it didn't. It missed, and two guys in the Avon cut themselves loose from the ship. And went to chase the parachute
Oh my gosh.
and the pump, which is inside of a small canister,
Yeah.
like an oil drum. And so realizing they were drifting off in the Caribbean somewhere, and we had the engine running and could bring the ship around to pick them up.
They had no outboard.
No, oars. No.
For those of you who don't know, rowing in Avon is virtually impossible.
But it's good for a washing machine. It's, this is in the canal, and to have that much fresh water to wash everything down was fantastic. Good use for that Avon lasted for 40 years.
Wow.
Remarkable. One of the San Francisco Pier 7.
Oh my gosh.
There's a difference. Although I didn't have it really figured out how to, or I didn't realize that there was a strong ebb tide. we're on the south side of this pier, and I came up a little hard against this pier. There they are. We broke loose the port anchor, and had some woodwork to do.
Oops.
Now, somebody is. How did that photograph get taken? I had 7 crew, and I've got 7 in the photo. What
Are
was?
you in it?
Yeah, on the far right.
Or maybe you had a timer and a little tripod.
God, I don't.
They do that in a lot of cameras,
Yeah.
you know, you have a delay and you can
Well,
walk over there and do it.
The thing that's just really remarkable was that we never had one argument. Some of these guys look a little different because they, 3 of them got off in Panama, 2 of them got off in Panama, 2 or 3, and I picked up a couple of other guys. The guy from the, this is Alan Dring, now deceased. The son of Harry Dring, who hired me back in the late 50s to work on the state ships. Neil Brady, the architect, carpenter. Bob Armstrong, without the fingers. John Sylvester, now president of Marine Chartering Company. And, come on. Forgot it. The son of Dulcie Thorstenson, George Kiskadden's prime secretary, and Bernd, the ship doctor.
And which one are you?
Far right,
With the beard?
with the beard. Yeah.
Aren't you good looking?
Real good looking 30.
Yeah, right, yeah.
What happened to the free?
50 years.
What happened to the Free? What happened to the Free? I sold her to the, I tried to keep her. I had hoped to do a return voyage. Pete Seeger came down. I wanted to do a Clearwater West. And Pete walks back and forth on the ship and he says, you know, it's probably a good, doable project, but it's the wrong ship. And he cooled on it. I listed it with brokers in Sausalito. They had no idea what this was. And but Spike Africa came over, and I didn't know. I guess one of the brokers said go over there and take a look. And she got back to Sausalito and put the word out that her stem was rotten, and that it wasn't safe to take her anywhere. So I didn't have any faith after a while in Sausalito brokers, and so I put an ad in the Berkeley Barb,
Yeah.
and the Moody brothers showed up. Who are the Moody brothers? They are the scions of Moody's Industrials, and I don't know if they're still around, but they're one of the research companies on the value of corporations. And there was ample amount of bucks there for them to think about this. And in one of the picture books over on the table, you can see that when they arrived, it felt like half of Berkeley was now coming down to the ship. We showed films down in the lower hold, and a lot of work got done. They threw the I Ching. Remember, this is 1969-70. And they then took off to, I urged them to take, there was a longshore strike on at the time, and I urged that they take on medical supplies or and get some support. They opted not. They kept on going and protested the French atmospheric tests at Moorea. This was at the same time that the French blew up the Greenpeace ship in Australia and New Zealand. So Nixon had just opened China, and after some real conflict and contest with the French, the Free was the first American flag vessel into China. After that, she was not allowed entry in Vietnam and was not welcomed in Johannesburg, but crossed the Atlantic again and protested the American escapades in Nicaragua and Salvador, and carried farm supplies and medical supplies for Oxfam. So, and after that, she crossed the Atlantic back again to protest the Swedish nuclear plant at Guteborg, and with a lot of helium balloons, they took Free to Sweden and released the balloons so they could see the drift of where this nuclear exhaust is going to end up in Denmark. And
Norman, did she sail under the same master for all that
yes,
late cruising?
yes, and two of the brothers left, and David Moody stuck with her. And then we have a film here. What happened to Karen? Good to see you. Yeah. Do we have that film of David Moody addressing the fate of the Free? Is it possible to show it on this?
It's about 10 minutes long.
Yeah.
We could just handle that.
Well, I think we've used up an hour. Yeah, but we can show the film anyway, couldn't we?
After, yeah.
Yeah, good. Okay, fine. Well, then this brings us. But in answer to the question, as you'll see in this short film, David Moody brings the ship back to the builder's yard, Ring Anderson's yard in Svendborg, and orders all his work done because the ship needed it. Got to do the work. And so the yard gets onto it, and they take care of it. And David then belatedly says he doesn't have any money to pay for it, but they can have the ship. He says, "I'll sign it off. I'm done." And a Danish bank stood in and and donated something close to $10,000 to help cover the bill. I reached out to this foundation that was formed to try to go back to the same people that had such generosity some years before, and also raise some money here from crew members and others. But either the watchman was asleep, or the pump didn't work, or the pump worked but it was clogged, or somebody wasn't paying attention, or the electricity was off. She sank alongside the dock. So, but that was in Denmark, so what do? They get her back up again. And they, everything is repairable. Everything is good until she sinks again. And she's still there. So only a couple of months ago, I called the yard in Svendborg and asked them, and boy, were they pissed. I mean, they didn't want to hear from me or anybody else. They just wish it was gone, so they could get access to their pier back again. But if we
This
get,
happens with boats.
yes, right, they can be in the wrong place at the wrong time. So more of the paperwork. Agent is totally confused. We rigged up a sail on a bicycle. Got pulled over by the police. It would tack, but it was not controllable. And we used the elbows as the semi-diesel engine. 10-inch bore, 17-inch stroke. Semi-diesel means that the compression ratio is 10 to 1. Pure diesel is 17 to 1. It creates the heat by compression. This engine has little glow plugs that if you have enough electricity, they will ignite the diesel fuel in a heat chamber if you don't have enough electricity, you can use small little road flare. So you're lighting up this, putting it all back together in the engine. And the engine is rotated with compressed air or captured exhaust from the last time it ran. So you get one shot at it.
Boy.
You don't, unlike your car, you can keep turning the key. Not here. And the engine will run just as well in either direction and run forever until it's melted down. And I've heard tales of where these can be kick-started with a good pair of tennis shoes. All you have to do is get some of that compression happening, and chances are it'll start.
How long ago did she go underwater last?
Maybe 2 years. It's a long time.
Where's that picture with the brown backs?
The brown backs. Yeah. Well, yeah, that's,
The crew.
yeah, that's, those are crew members. It looks like they went native. Yeah. This is when ships look like ships.
Yeah.
There's nothing like this left. There's the Avon. We had no arguments. We didn't, in 5 months at sea, we did not have an argument. Oh, lower right is my corner in the master's cabin,
Nice. Where'd the Rolex go?
right here.
Excellent.
A log. Tap for a log.
Yeah.
So how many miles did you log?
Never figured it out. The whole thing was to get through the day. No,
There's your Chevron fuel tag,
yeah,
flag.
yeah. We did them proud. To carry enough fuel, they were tearing out a gas station, so I bought one of the underground tanks, had it tested, cleaned up, painted, brought to the ship, rigged up the mizzen mast and the main boom and gaff, and lifted it on the ship into the hold. Fed them out of dog food bowls, and it was something canned without refrigeration. You only can have so many options. There's a tanning photograph.
There's a lack thereof.
No, you forgot about the Indians on Treasure Island.
I did, thank you. Later in the fall of '69, the Indians declared occupation of Alcatraz. And they had one tank full of water. But the water barge, which used to tie up at Pier 43 in San Francisco, they continued thinking that occupation would be short term. It wasn't. The government, General Services Administration, said no more water. And I thought that was really a chicken shit thing to do. If you can't get along with somebody, is to thirst them out. So I reached out to the Native Americans and said, I've got a ship with a deck for a lot of room for garbage cans, and we can get new garbage cans and fill them with water in Oakland and go to Alcatraz. So if you'll help me get this lead stripping off the bottom of the ship and recaulked, we'll carry water. Good trade. So all of the lead and the horsehair felt came off, the caulking began, the ship got tightened up, and we began this trip back and forth from Oakland to Alcatraz, Oakland to Alcatraz. Well, before long, I realized we were taking water out. We were bringing copper and brass back.
They were scrapping the joint?
They were scrapping the
Oh,
island.
Jesus.
And
Ay,
so,
ay, ay.
and the Coast Guard put up a blockade around Alcatraz. And so, and I put up a different flag every time I went out. So I'd put up the Panamanian flag, and finally I put up the Cross of St. Andrew. And so it was, we were the only ones that got through. And we had a pro bono attorney who was trained in federal law, and we were having meetings in the federal building. And every meeting, the Indians would send new people who had no answers, no suggestions. They just sat there and listened and said, of course, you never see them again. And it was, God, I forget, the Kingston Trio or somebody, months into this, bought them a fishing boat. And then they said, no, thank you, we don't need your help anymore. We've got our own boat. And I think that the boat that they had didn't last very long. And they weren't gone. What was his name? Dennis Banks? Yeah. And got into a problem in a pool hall in San Francisco and hit somebody with a cue stick. And San Francisco just turned off. It was amazing how fast it came to a halt. And they weren't there much longer after that. But every year on October 10th, there is a celebration of the occupation.
Probably need to wrap it up, I'm sorry.
Oh, it's time to go home?
It's time, but I know.
Can't,
Why
Can-
can't we see the 10-minute movie?
No, but after we're done with this,
Yeah.
okay?
Okay.
After we're done, I don't.
oh, are you, I thought you stopped 10 minutes ago.
No,
No.
I never stop.
We
Oh.
were letting
I'm
you
not gonna
continue.
videotape.
Oh, I'm just starting. Yeah,
Right.
yeah. Slow start, better finish. Yeah.
So we'll just complete
Okay,
this
fine.
recording and this wonderful stories you've been telling. And if you'd like to stay, I did find the 10-minute movie. I can put it on here whenever he is completed with this. So-
I'm done
Okay, thank you.
in more ways than one.
North.
Thank you.